It was 3:47 in the morning when Elena Ramirez finally stopped pretending she was going to sleep. She lay flat on her back in the dark, staring at a water stain on the ceiling she'd been meaning to report to the landlord for 6 months. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional wheeze coming through the thin wall separating her room from the boys. Diego. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded to the kitchen. His inhaler was on the counter. She picked it up, shook it once. That hollow rattle that meant maybe 3 days left, maybe 4 if he didn't have a bad night. $140 to refill it. She had $62 in her account and 9 days until her next freelance payment, assuming the client didn't stall again. She put it down and didn't let herself think about it anymore. Thinking didn't pay for anything. By 6:15 she was ironing the same gray blouse she'd worn to the last 2 interviews, standing in the kitchen while Marcus ate cereal too loud and Diego sat across from him quietly, backpack already on, watching his brother like he was personally offended by the noise. "Marcus, chew like you have a mouth," Elena said, without looking up from the iron. "I am chewing with my mouth," Marcus said. "Closed. Chew with it closed," she told him. She unplugged the iron and checked her phone. The confirmation email from Vanguard Health was still there. Interview, 8:30 a.m., administrative operations, entry level. She'd applied to 11 jobs that week. This was the only one that called back. She read the company name one more time. Vanguard Health, biotech, one of those startups that had exploded riding the telemedicine wave, the kind of place that had a rooftop terrace and a cold brew tap and still somehow managed to pay its admin staff $17 an hour. But $17 an hour was $17 an hour. "Don't be picky. Just get the job," she whispered to herself, folding the ironing board away. She dropped the boys at school, took the bus downtown, and walked 3 blocks in shoes that were half a size too small because the right ones had a heel that clicked on hard floors, and she didn't want to sound nervous before she even sat down. The Vanguard Health lobby was exactly what she expected. Glass everywhere. A receptionist who smiled like it was her job, which it was. A wall with the company mission statement printed in oversized white letters, "Healthcare shouldn't be a privilege." Elena looked at it for a second longer than she meant to. Then she smiled back at the receptionist and took a seat. She was 20 minutes early. She always was. She waited 31 minutes before anyone called her name. The waiting area was all white walls and low furniture, the kind of chairs that looked expensive but were somehow uncomfortable. 2 other candidates sat nearby, both younger, both with the kind of quiet confidence that came from not having to check their phone every 5 minutes to make sure the babysitter hadn't called. Elena kept her resume folder on her lap and her back straight. When they finally called her in, there were 3 of them behind the table, a woman in her 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, a younger man in a linen shirt who hadn't looked up from his laptop since Elena walked in, and a second woman who introduced herself as the hiring lead and immediately forgot to introduce the other 2. Elena sat down, folded her hands, and smiled. The questions started, standard enough. Experience, availability, software proficiency. She answered cleanly, no filler words, no over-explaining. Years of job interviews had taught her how to make $60 shoes in a 5-year employment gap sound like a deliberate career pivot. Then the hiring lead leaned forward slightly and asked her how she handled sensitive information. It was a routine question. Elena knew it was routine. But something about the way it landed made her pause half a second too long, because the last time someone had asked her that, it was a logistics contractor who turned out to be paying her to quietly backdate shipping records. She'd walked off that job after 2 weeks. "I handle it with discretion," Elena said. "I don't share what isn't mine to share." The woman nodded but wrote something down, and Elena knew from the way the man in the linen shirt finally closed his laptop that the interview was functionally over. They thanked her sincerely, mentioning that they still had a few more candidates to interview. They assured her they'd be in touch by the end of the week. She was out the door in 4 minutes. In the elevator going down, she let out a long breath and stared at the floor numbers dropping. Lobby. She already knew. She'd heard it in the pause before, "We'll be in touch." She'd heard it in the way the hiring lead's pen moved. She didn't get the job. She was never going to get the job. The lobby doors slid open and the Austin heat hit her like a wall. She pulled out her phone, opened her texts, and started typing to the babysitter. Running a little late. Can you stay another hour? When she stopped. There were two men in suits standing near the elevator bank just inside the glass, speaking low and close together. One of them had his back to her. The other was facing just enough in her direction that she could see his expression. Tight, controlled, the face of someone delivering bad news and trying not to look like it. She wouldn't have thought anything of it. Suits talking in lobbies was the whole personality of buildings like this. But then she heard it. Not the whole sentence. Just enough. Trial data. If this gets out before the FDA window closes, Chen. The doors slid shut behind her. Elena stood on the sidewalk in the heat, phone still in her hand, the text to the babysitter half finished. She stood there for a moment longer than made sense. Then she opened her notebook, a battered spiral she kept in her bag to track client hours and invoice details. And without fully deciding to, she wrote down exactly what she'd heard. The phrase, the tone, the name. It was a habit. A dumb freelancer habit she'd picked up from years of working for people who later tried to tell her she'd done less than she had. Write everything down, date it, keep it. She capped the pen, dropped the notebook back in her bag, and started walking toward the bus stop. She had to pick up Diego's inhaler prescription before the pharmacy closed. She had $62. She'd figure out the math on the bus. She was half a block from the bus stop when she heard him, not his words at first. Just footsteps, fast ones, the kind that had a purpose behind them, cutting through the mid-morning sidewalk crowd with too much urgency for a Tuesday. She didn't turn around immediately. In 11 years of living in this city, she'd learned that turning around too fast was how you invited trouble. So she kept walking, shifted her bag to her other shoulder, and listened. The footsteps got closer. Excuse me, hey, excuse me, miss. She turned then. He was older, maybe mid-50s, silver at his temples, dressed in the kind of suit that didn't have a price tag because people who bought suits like that didn't think about price tags. He was slightly out of breath, which told her he'd moved fast to catch up, and he was holding one hand up in that universal gesture that was supposed to mean I'm not a threat, which in Elena's experience meant exactly nothing. She recognized him, not personally, but she'd seen his face before, the way one notices faces and files them away without intending to. The framed photo in the lobby. The company website skimmed the night before in preparation for the interview. Dr. Raymond Hale, founder and CEO of Vanguard Health. She stopped walking, but she didn't step toward him. You were just upstairs, he said, still catching his breath. The interview, administrative operations. I was, Elena said. He glanced around, quick, practiced, the look of a man who'd spent years being aware of who was watching him. Then he looked back at her and dropped his voice just enough. You were sitting in the east lobby, near the elevator bank. Before you went up, it wasn't a question. Elena felt something shift quietly in her chest but kept her face still. I was waiting, she said. They ran late. I know, Hale said. He took one step closer, not aggressive but deliberate. I need to know what you heard. The bus stop was 30 feet away. She could see the route number posted. She did a fast and quiet calculation. How long until the next bus? Whether her boys' school had afternoon coverage until 4, whether the pharmacy closed at 6 or 7. I didn't hear anything, she said. Hale looked at her for a long moment. Not the look of someone deciding whether to believe her, the look of someone who already didn't. You wrote something down, he said quietly, in a notebook, on the sidewalk, right after you walked out. Elena's grip tightened on her bag strap. She thought about Diego's inhaler, about the $62, about the half-typed text to the babysitter still sitting unsent on her phone. She thought about the 11 job applications, and the one callback, and the 4 minutes it had taken them to decide she wasn't what they were looking for. She thought about the words she'd heard through a closing glass door. Trial data. FDA window. She knew what those words meant, not because she was a scientist or a lawyer, but because she had spent the last 3 years doing data entry for medical logistics firms, and she had seen what happened when numbers got adjusted before deadlines. She had walked away from it once before. She had lost 2 weeks of income walking away from it. I write everything down, she said. It's a habit. I know, Hale said again, and then quieter, almost to himself more than to her. That's the problem. The two of them stood on that sidewalk in the Austin heat, the city moving around them like it had no idea anything had just changed. Elena didn't move toward the bus stop, not yet. His car was parked directly in front of the building, black, long, the kind that didn't have a model name you'd recognize because it wasn't made for people who looked up model names. The driver was already standing outside it, door open, like he'd been called down before Hale even reached the sidewalk. Hale gestured toward it. Not forcefully, just an open hand, an invitation that carried the quiet weight of a man who wasn't used to being told no. Elena looked at the car, then at him, then at the driver who was staring at a fixed point somewhere above her left shoulder the way trained people do when they're pretending not to exist. "I don't get into cars with men I don't know," she said. "My name is Raymond Hale. I founded Vanguard Health in 2019. I have a daughter at UT Austin and a standing reservation at Uchi every Thursday. You can Google all of that before you sit down," he said. "I just need 10 minutes. Elena didn't move. Hale took a breath, glanced up at the building, behind him, quick, almost involuntary, then back at her. "There are cameras on this sidewalk," he said quietly. "And the people who had that conversation you overheard will see the footage before the end of day. I'd rather you were somewhere that wasn't on it when they do, that landed differently than everything else he'd said." Elena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the notebook in her bag, the words she'd written down without fully deciding to. Trial data, FDA window, Chen. She thought about Diego's inhaler rattling hollow that morning. She got in the car. The driver closed the door behind her without a word and returned to the front. The partition between the front and back seats was already up. The city outside the tinted windows went silent. Not gone, just muffled, like the volume of the world had been turned down 2 notches. Hale sat across from her. He loosened his collar once, a small human gesture that didn't match the rest of him, and then he looked at her directly. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked. "Trial data," Elena said. "FDA window, and the name Chen." She paused. "Whoever Chen is was being told that if something gets out before the window closes, there's a problem." Hale nodded slowly, not surprised. Confirming. "Chen is my chief medical officer," he said. "And he has been falsifying efficacy data on our respiratory monitoring app for the last 4 months. The car was very quiet. "The trial was supposed to prove the app could reliably predict asthma episodes in pediatric patients," Hale continued. "The real numbers don't clear the FDA threshold. Chen's numbers do. The difference between the two is the kind of gap that doesn't show up until a parent trusts the app instead of their instincts and their kid ends up in the ER." Elena said nothing, but her hand had moved without her noticing, resting flat against her bag where the notebook was. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you already know enough to be a problem," Hale said, "and I'd rather you be an informed one." Elena looked at him steadily. Outside the tinted windows, Austin moved past them. A cyclist, a food truck, 2 construction workers eating lunch on a curb. Normal city, normal Tuesday. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Hale was quiet for just a moment. Then he said, "I want you to come back tomorrow." Elena didn't answer him right away. She looked out the window at the city going about its business and let the silence sit there between them. In her experience, men like Hale weren't used to silence. They filled it, and what they filled it with told you more than whatever they'd prepared to say. But Hale didn't fill it. He just waited, which told her something, too. "Come back for what exactly?" she finally said. Not a question, a demand for specifics. "I need documentation that didn't pass through my hands," he said. "Chen monitors internal access logs. Anything I pull, he sees. But there's a file, an original trial report, unedited, generated before Chen's team touched the numbers. It exists on an internal server that admin staff have routine access to." Elena turned from the window and looked at him. "You want me to walk back into that building?" she said. "The one that just rejected me. Go onto a server I'd have no legitimate reason to be on. Pull a file that your chief medical officer is actively trying to keep buried and hand it to you." "Not to me," Hale said. "Directly to the FDA whistleblower portal. Bypasses me entirely, bypasses the board, goes straight to the federal office handling the approval window." He paused. "I can get you back in the building. Temporary contractor badge. Data entry backfill. We use them regularly. Nobody looks twice." "And when they do look," Elena asked, "You're a freelance data entry contractor on a one-day assignment," he said. "It's not unusual, it's not traceable. You will log in, pull the file, upload it, and walk out." Elena let out a short breath through her nose, not a laugh, something closer to disbelief at the straightforwardness of it. "You've thought about this for a while," she said. 6 weeks, he said. "And in 6 weeks you couldn't find a single person inside that building you trusted enough to do this," she said. Hale's jaw tightened slightly. No, Elena absorbed that. A billionaire. A founder. A man who had built an entire company from nothing and filled it with hundreds of people. And in 6 weeks of watching fraud happen inside his own walls, he hadn't found one person he trusted enough to hand this to. She thought about what that said about the building she'd just walked out of. She thought about what it said about him. "I have 2 kids," she said, 10 years old. "One of them has asthma. If this app gets approved on fake numbers and ends up in the hands of parents making decisions about their kids based on what it tells them." She stopped, looked at him. "You understand what I'm saying?" "Yes," Hale said quietly. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I know," he said. Another silence. Shorter this time. "I need to think about it," Elena said. She reached for the door handle. "And I need to pick my kids up at 4, so I need to know where the nearest bus stop is from wherever we are right now." Hale leaned forward and said something to the driver through a small intercom. The car pulled smoothly back into traffic. "He'll take you to the school," Hale said. "I didn't ask for that," Elena said immediately. "I know," he said again. "But you've already missed one bus, and the next one doesn't get you there until 4:20. Elena looked at him. He wasn't wrong. She hated that he wasn't wrong. She settled back against the seat and kept her bag on her lap and watched Austin pass by outside the window. Her city, the one she'd lived in for 11 years. The one that kept promising opportunities and kept making her do the math on $62. She had until tomorrow morning to decide. She spent the ride thinking about Diego's inhaler. The driver pulled up outside the school at 3:58. Elena was out of the car before it fully stopped, bag over her shoulder, moving with the automatic efficiency of a mother who had learned that 2 minutes was the difference between picking up her kids and getting a concerned call from the front office. She didn't look back at the car. Marcus and Diego were waiting on the low brick wall outside the main entrance, Marcus kicking his heels against it rhythmically, Diego reading something on a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a permission slip she'd forgotten about. They both looked up when they saw her, and neither of them said anything about the black car pulling away behind her because they were 10, and it didn't register as unusual the way it would have registered to her. "You're almost late," Marcus said. "Almost isn't late," Elena told him, taking the permission slip from Diego and folding it into her bag without reading it yet. Diego looked up at her with the particular quiet attention he'd had since he was small, the kind that saw more than it let on. "Did you get the job?" he asked. Elena put her hand briefly on the back of his neck the way she always did, a small automatic thing. "Not yet," she said. "They took the city bus, home." Marcus talked the entire way about something that had happened at lunch involving a basketball and a substitute teacher and a sequence of events Elena followed with about 40% of her attention. Diego sat beside her and looked out the window and said nothing, which was normal for Diego. Elena looked at the back of his head and thought about a pediatric asthma app with adjusted numbers clearing an FDA threshold and ending up on the phones of parents exactly like her. She made dinner, pasta, jarred sauce, the end of a bag of frozen peas mixed in because it was that or nothing green. She helped Marcus with a worksheet about state capitals that he found personally offensive. She reminded Diego twice to use his inhaler before bed and stood in the doorway of their room until she heard the small mechanical click and exhale that meant he had. She sat at the kitchen table after they were asleep with her laptop open and the notebook beside it. She looked up the FDA whistleblower portal. It was real, straightforward, a federal submission system for reporting fraud in drug and medical device approvals. She read through it slowly, the way she read everything, not skimming, actually reading, because she had learned a long time ago that the details other people skipped were the ones that mattered. Then she looked up at Chen. Dr. Raymond Chen, Chief Medical Officer, Vanguard Health. LinkedIn profile, a conference keynote from 2024, a quote in a healthcare technology article about the future of pediatric monitoring. She looked at his face on the screen for a moment. Then she looked up Hale. Everything he'd said on the sidewalk checked out. The founding date, the daughter at UT, even the restaurant. She found a profile piece from 2023, a long one. The kind a journalist writes when they think a subject is genuinely interesting. Hale had grown up in Corpus Christi. Father worked oil rigs, mother cleaned hotel rooms. He'd put himself through UT on loans and built Vanguard from a pitch deck and 2 investors who almost pulled out. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of her kitchen and thought about what she stood to lose, not abstractly, concretely, the way she did everything. Her freelance contracts, her reputation in the small, tight world of medical data entry where everyone knew everyone. The possibility that it went wrong, that Chen's lawyers moved faster than the FDA portal, that the contractor badge created a paper trail that led directly back to her name. She thought about $62 and a hollow inhaler. She thought about all of it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and typed a text to the babysitter, asking if she was available tomorrow morning. The babysitter replied in 4 minutes. She was. Elena put the phone down and looked at the notebook one more time, the words she'd written on the sidewalk without fully deciding to, the habit that had started all of this. She closed the notebook. She wasn't doing this because a billionaire had asked her to. She wasn't doing it because it was brave, or because it made a good story. She was doing it because she knew what those numbers meant if they were wrong, and she knew what it felt like to be a parent reading a screen and trusting it completely, because she had no other choice. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. She didn't sleep much, but that wasn't new. The babysitter arrived at 7:45. Elena had already packed her bag, fed the boys, and written the school pickup time on the notepad by the fridge, the way she always did when she had a morning appointment. Marcus asked where she was going. Work things, she said. He accepted this the way 10-year-olds accept things that don't directly affect them, and went back to his cereal. Diego looked at her once, that quiet, careful look, and said nothing. She kissed them both and left. The bus downtown took 23 minutes. She spent it with her bag on her lap and her hands still, watching the city come alive outside the window. Delivery trucks, coffee shops pulling up their shutters. Construction crews are already loud at this hour. Austin in motion, indifferent and relentless. The same city it had been yesterday, when she'd walked out of that building defeated, and the same city it would be tomorrow, regardless of what she did today. Raymond Hale was waiting for her outside the building, not on the sidewalk this time, just inside the lobby, visible through the glass. He was holding a temporary contractor badge and a single sheet of paper. When she pushed through the doors, he handed both to her without greeting her first, which she appreciated. She didn't need warmth right now. She needed information. She read the sheet while he talked. The file was named Q3CHR Original on the admin server. 3rd floor. The data entry contractors worked in an open plan room on the east side. She would have legitimate access to the server as part of the backfill assignment. Routine document filing, nothing unusual. The original trial report sat in a folder she would have no obvious reason to open, but no obvious reason to avoid either. She needed to download it to a personal drive and submit it directly through the FDA portal link Hale had printed at the bottom of the sheet. "How long will it take once I'm at the desk?" she asked. 10 minutes if you don't rush, he said. Rushing is what makes people look. Elena folded the sheet and put it in her bag, clipped the contractor badge to her jacket. Then she looked up at him. "If this goes wrong," she said. "I know," Raymond Hale said. "No," she said. "I need you to actually hear what I'm saying. If this goes wrong, I lose my freelance contracts. I potentially face legal exposure. I have 2 kids and no safety net and $62 in my account. So if this goes wrong, I need to know that you are not going to disappear behind your lawyers and leave me standing in it alone." Hale held her gaze without flinching. "I won't," he said. Elena studied his face for a moment the way she studied invoices and data sheets, looking for the thing that didn't add up, the number that had been quietly adjusted. She didn't find it. She turned toward the elevator. The 3rd floor was exactly what the sheet had described. Open plan, low partition walls, 8 or 9 people already at desks, the particular focused quiet of people doing repetitive work. Nobody looked up when she came in. A woman at the front pointed her to an empty workstation without asking her name, assuming the badge said everything necessary. Elena sat down. logged in with the temporary credentials Hale had printed on the sheet. The desktop loaded. Standard interface, nothing unusual. She opened the document management system and navigated through it slowly, the way someone would, who was familiarizing themselves with a new system, which was exactly what she was supposed to be doing. She found the folder. Q3 Tra Original sat between two other files with similar naming conventions, unremarkable, the kind of file name that disappeared in a list. She plugged in the small personal drive she'd brought from home, the one she used for freelance client files, nothing suspicious about it, and copied the file across. She watched the progress bar move. It finished in 40 seconds. She submitted it through the FDA portal from her phone under the desk, the link already loaded from the night before, the file uploading on mobile data so it didn't pass through Vanguard's network. She had thought about that at 2 in the morning and had gotten up to write it down so she didn't forget. Then she closed everything, logged out cleanly, and spent the next hour doing the actual data entry backfill work she'd been assigned. Routine, unremarkable, the invisible labor she'd been doing for years. At 10:15 she picked up her bag, returned the badge to the front desk and walked out. She took the elevator down alone, stood in the lobby for a moment. Through the glass she could see the sidewalk where she'd stood yesterday with a hollow inhaler rattling in the back of her mind and $62 between her family and nothing. She pushed through the doors and walked out into the Austin heat. Her phone buzzed. A confirmation receipt from the FDA portal. Submission received. Case number assigned. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a long moment. Then she put her phone in her bag and walked toward the bus stop. She had to call about Diego's inhaler refill. She'd been moving the number around in her head all morning. $62, $140, the gap between them. She still didn't have a solution. But she was going to make the call anyway, because that was what had to be done. The call needed to be made. The next step needed to be figured out. The momentum had to be kept. The bus came. Then she got on. 3 days passed and nothing happened. Elena checked the FDA portal case number every morning before the boys woke up, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with her coffee going cold beside her. The status never changed. Submission received. Under review. The same 2 words sitting there like they meant something, like somewhere in a federal office a person had actually opened the file and read it and understood what it meant for families like hers. She told herself this was normal. Federal processes moved slowly. She knew that. She had read about it. She went back to her freelance work. Data entry, invoice reconciliation, a small logistics firm that paid her $12 an hour and always sent the payment 4 days late. She sat at the same kitchen table during school hours and worked through it methodically, the same way she did everything, and tried not to refresh the portal more than twice a day. On the second day, Raymond Hale texted her. A single line, confirmation received on my end, process is moving. She read it twice and put her phone face down and went back to work. On the third day, Diego had a bad night. She heard him at 2 in the morning. That particular cough that was different from a regular cough, the one that had a tightness underneath it that she felt somewhere in her chest every time she heard it. She was in his doorway before she was fully awake, the way mothers move toward that sound without deciding to. She sat on the edge of his bed while he used the inhaler. 1 puff. Waited. Another. The cough settled slowly, the way it always did, and he lay back against the pillow looking smaller than he was, his breathing evening out. I'm okay, he said, because he always said that. I know, she said, because she always said that too. She stayed until he was asleep again. Then she sat in the kitchen in the dark and thought about an app that was supposed to predict exactly this moment. That was supposed to give parents like her enough warning to get ahead of it, instead of sitting in the dark after the fact. Her heart still loud in her chest, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. She thought about what that app would be worth to her. Really worth. Not in dollars, in the specific currency of 3 in the morning and a child's breathing. And she thought about what it would mean if the numbers behind it were wrong. She went to bed at 4 and was up again at 6. On the 4th day, everything moved at once. She was in the middle of a data entry shift when her phone rang. Unknown number, Texas area code. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. Ms. Ramirez? A woman's voice. Precise, measured, the voice of someone who chose words carefully by professional habit. My name is Agent Patricia Owens. I'm with the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. I'm calling regarding a submission made to our whistleblower portal 4 days ago under your name. Elena set down her pen. I'm here, she said. We've reviewed the documentation you submitted, Owens said. I'd like to meet with you in person at your earliest convenience, today if possible. Elena looked at the clock on her laptop. School pickup was at 3:30. The babysitter could cover it, but she hated asking twice in 1 week. I can do noon, she said. Noon works, Owens said. I'll send you the address. Elena hung up, sat very still for a moment. Then she texted the babysitter. The address Owens sent was a federal building downtown, 12 minutes from her apartment by bus. Elena arrived 7 minutes early and sat in a waiting area that smelled like recycled air and government carpet, and thought about how she had spent the last 4 days telling herself she had done something small and careful and contained. It didn't feel small anymore. Owens was younger than her voice suggested, late 30s, maybe 40, with the kind of composed energy that came from years of sitting across from people who were either lying or terrified and learning to tell the difference quickly. She shook Elena's hand and led her into a plain room with a table and 2 chairs and a bottle of water that Elena didn't touch. She asked Elena to walk her through everything. From the lobby, the overheard conversation, the notebook, Raymond Hale's approach on the sidewalk, the car, the contractor badge, the file. Elena walked her through it, clearly, chronologically, without editorializing, the way she tracked her own invoices, just the facts in the order they happened. When she finished, Owens looked at her for a moment. You're very precise, she said. I've had to be, Elena said. Owens nodded slowly. Miss Ramirez, the file you submitted contains what appears to be the original unaltered clinical trial data for Vanguard Health's respiratory monitoring application. Our preliminary analysis shows a statistically significant gap between that data and the figures submitted in the official FDA approval package. She paused. We've issued a hold on the approval process pending full investigation. Elena absorbed this. What happens now? She asked. We investigate, Owens said. That process will take time. Weeks, possibly months. During that period, we would ask that you limit discussion of this matter. She leaned forward slightly. I also want to be direct with you. The individuals responsible for the data alteration will become aware that an investigation has been opened. They will likely attempt to identify the source of the submission. The room was very quiet. They'll figure out it was me, Elena said. It's possible, Owens said, which is why I'd like to discuss your options regarding formal whistleblower protection status under federal law. Elena looked at the untouched water bottle on the table, then at Owens. Tell me what that means, she said. Owens walked her through it in plain language which Elena appreciated. Federal whistleblower protection meant her identity was legally shielded from disclosure during the investigation. Retaliation, termination, blacklisting, harassment was prohibited by law. If retaliation occurred, she had legal recourse. Elena listened carefully. Asked 2 questions, both about enforcement, not the law itself, but what happened when the law was ignored, because in her experience the gap between what was prohibited and what actually happened to people was where everything went wrong. Owens answered both questions without softening them. The protections were real but not instantaneous. Legal recourse meant process, and process meant time, and time meant exposure. Elena signed the forms anyway. She took the bus home, picked up the boys from the babysitter, made dinner, helped Marcus with homework, listened to Diego's breathing through the wall until it steadied into sleep. Then she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and checked her freelance client portal the way she did every evening. One of her contracts had been canceled. The notification had come in at 4:17 that afternoon. A medical logistics firm she had worked with for 14 months. Steady work, reliable payment. One of the 3 contracts that kept her afloat. The cancellation notice cited a routine restructuring of their data services. Standard language. The kind of language that meant nothing and covered everything. Elena stared at it. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about 4:17 in the afternoon. The meeting with Owens had ended at 1:30, 2 hours and 47 minutes between her walking out of a federal building and a 14-month contract disappearing. She opened the laptop again and looked at the cancellation notice one more time. Read it word by word, looking for anything specific, anything traceable. There was nothing, Just clean corporate language doing what clean corporate language was designed to do, terminate without evidence. She knew what this was. She also knew that knowing what it was and being able to prove what it was were two completely different things, and that the distance between them was exactly where people like Chen operated. She texted Raymond Hale. "One of my contracts was just canceled, 4 hours after I met with the FDA," he replied in 11 minutes. "I know. I'm sorry. Don't cancel anything else. Don't respond to the client. Don't reach out to them." Then a second message. "Chen called an emergency board meeting this afternoon. He knows the approval is on hold. He doesn't know the source yet, but he's looking." Elena read both messages twice, set her phone down, picked it up again. "How long before he finds me?" she typed. Hale's reply took longer this time. 4 minutes. "I don't know, but I need you to trust me for the next 72 hours. Elena looked at that message for a long time. Trust me. The two words that had preceded most of the worst decisions in her life. Her ex-husband had said them. The logistics contractor with the backdated records had said them. Every person who had ever needed something from her and dressed the need up as a relationship had said them. She put the phone face down on the table. 72 hours. She could do the math in 72 hours. She had $62, one remaining active contract, a canceled one, and a federal investigation that moved on its own timeline with no regard for hers. She had 2 boys and a babysitter she'd already called twice this week, and an inhaler that needed refilling before Friday. She turned the phone back over. 72 hours, she typed back. Nothing else. She closed the laptop and went to bed. She was asleep by 10, which surprised her. Her body had apparently decided that fear and exhaustion were the same thing and treated them accordingly. She woke up at 6 to Marcus arguing with Diego about whose turn it was to use the bathroom first, which was so normal it almost hurt. She made breakfast, got them out the door, came back to the kitchen and opened her laptop. There was an email. It had come in at 11:47 the previous night while she was asleep, from an address she didn't recognize. No subject line. The body of the email was 4 sentences. "Ms. Ramirez, we're aware of your meeting yesterday. We're also aware of your financial situation and your son's medical needs. There is a straightforward resolution to this that works in everyone's interest, including yours." At the bottom was a phone number. Elena read it 3 times. Then she took a screenshot of it, forwarded it to Agent Owens with a single line, "Received last night," and closed the email without responding. Her hands were steady. She noticed that. She had expected them not to be. She poured a second cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the street below. A woman walking a dog, a kid on a bike, the ordinary Tuesday texture of a city that had no idea. Her phone rang. "Owens." She picked up on the first ring. "I got your forward," Owens said. "Don't respond to that number. Don't delete the email. We're tracing the address, now." Then there was a brief pause. "Ms. Ramirez, this changes the nature of what we're dealing with. Contacting a federal witness is a criminal act. Whoever sent that email just made a significant mistake." "I know," Elena said. "Are you all right?" Owens asked. Elena looked out the window at the ordinary street below. She thought about the email sitting in her inbox, about Chen in his conference keynote from 2024, talking about the future of pediatric monitoring with the easy confidence of a man who had never once sat on the edge of a child's bed at 2 in the morning, listening for the sound of clear breathing. "I'm fine," she said. "What do I do next?" Owens told her to stay home, stay off email, stay off social media, let the federal process do what it was designed to do, and trust that the email trace would move faster than Chen's next attempt. Elena said she understood. She hung up and immediately felt the weight of having nothing to do. Doing nothing was its own kind of unbearable when everything around her was moving. She had learned that in the months after her husband left, that the worst part wasn't the crisis itself, but the hours inside it when there was no task to complete, no next step to execute, nothing between her and the full unobstructed view of how bad things actually were. She cleaned the apartment, all of it, the kind of cleaning that wasn't about dirt but about control, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, reorganizing the cabinet under the sink, scrubbing the grout in the bathroom with an old toothbrush because it gave her hands something precise to do. By noon she had run out of apartment. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her freelance portal and looked at her remaining active contract, a small accounting firm. 3 years, steady, nothing medical, nothing connected to Vanguard or anything adjacent to it. She stared at it like she could make it disappear through anticipation alone. It didn't disappear. She made lunch, ate half of it, put the rest in the fridge. Her phone buzzed. Not a call, a news alert. Local Austin business news. A site she followed for freelance leads. The headline sat on her screen for a moment before she fully processed it. Vanguard Health CEO Raymond Hale steps back from operations amid internal review. She read it 3 times. Steps back. Internal review. The language of a company managing a narrative. Not transparent, not honest, just controlled. She clicked through to the article. It was thin, 3 paragraphs, clearly written from a press release. Hale was taking a temporary leave. The board was conducting a routine operational review. A spokesperson confirmed the company remained committed to its mission. Chen's name was not mentioned. Elena put her phone down on the table very carefully, the way something was set down when the grip couldn't be trusted. Hale was gone, or had stepped away, or had pulled back as part of something she wasn't understanding. She didn't know which. She didn't have enough information to know, and she had sent him a text 40 minutes ago that hadn't been answered. Now, she sat alone in her kitchen with $62, one remaining contract, a federal investigation that moved on its own timeline, and a son who needed an inhaler refill by Friday. She picked up her phone and called Hale's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. His voice, calm and professional, asking her to leave a message. She didn't leave one. She sat there for a long moment. Then she pulled up the news article again and read it one more time, slower, looking for the thing between the lines. Internal review, operational, routine. Every word chosen to say as little as possible while sounding like transparency. She knew what this was, too. Chen hadn't found her yet, but he had found Hale. And with Hale sidelined, the only person inside Vanguard who knew what she'd done and why was now unreachable. She sat on the outside of it all, holding a case number from the FDA and an email from someone who knew her son had asthma. That last part was what kept coming back to her. They knew about Diego. Not just that she had kids, but that Diego specifically had asthma. That wasn't public information. It wasn't something found from a LinkedIn profile or a basic background check. That was the kind of detail that came from someone looking carefully and specifically. Someone who had understood from the beginning that the most effective pressure point on a single mother wasn't her finances or her reputation, but her child. She stood up from the table and walked to the window. There she stood, looking at the street below without really seeing it. She thought about calling Owens again. She had already called twice today, and Owens had said she would be in touch. She thought about calling a lawyer, but she didn't have a lawyer. She had never needed one, and had no idea how to find one quickly and no money to pay one regardless. She thought about walking away, completely and cleanly, call the unknown number, hear the straightforward resolution that worked in everyone's interest including hers, take whatever they were offering and use it to refill Diego's inhaler and pay the rent, and go back to the life she'd had before she sat in a lobby for 31 minutes and heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. She stood at the window and let herself think about it honestly, without flinching, because she had learned that the only way to properly reject something was to actually look at it first. It would be easy. That was the truth of it. It would be so easy. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had gone to a job interview. She had written something in a notebook out of habit. She had made a decision in the back of a car that she could just as easily unmake now, because the FDA investigation was federal, complex, and slow. She was one woman with $62, a sick kid, and no safety net. And nobody would blame her for stepping back from something this large. She stood there with that thought for a long time. Then she thought about 2 a.m, Diego's cough, and the quiet that settled in the room after his breathing finally evened out. She thought about parents across the country buying an app because a doctor recommended it, trusting it the way she would have trusted it, completely and without question, because when a child can't breathe properly, anything that promises to help is trusted. She thought about the gap between the real numbers and Chen's numbers and what lived in that gap. Not statistics. Children. She turned away from the window. She picked up her phone and called Owens. "I need to know where the investigation stands," she said when Owens picked up. "And I need to know it today, because I think I'm running out of time and I need to decide whether to keep going or step back, and I can't make that decision without information." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Miss Ramirez," Owens said, "I was about to call you." Elena went still. "We traced the email address," Owens said. "It routes through a third-party service, but the origin IP places it inside the Vanguard Health building. We've also cross-referenced it with internal communications we subpoenaed this morning." Another pause, shorter this time. "We have enough to move. We're executing a warrant on Vanguard servers this afternoon." Elena sat down slowly in the kitchen chair. "Raymond Hale," she said. "The article said he stepped back." "Mr. Hale is cooperating fully with the investigation," Owens said. The step back was mutually agreed upon to prevent Chen from suspecting the level of federal involvement. It wasn't a removal. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. "Ms. Ramirez," Owens said, "you held. That matters." Elena opened her eyes and looked at the kitchen. The sticky note on the fridge that still said rent due, the 2 cereal bowls in the drying rack, the small mechanical inhaler on the counter that needed $140 and had 62 standing between it and her. "What happens after the warrant?" she asked. "Chen will be notified of the investigation formally," Owens said. "At that point your identity as the submission source becomes part of the protected federal record. He can suspect. He cannot touch you legally." "And the app?" Elena asked. "The approval is on hold indefinitely pending review of the original data," Owens said. "If the fraud is confirmed, and based on what we have it will be, the falsified submission is rejected and Vanguard is required to resubmit with accurate figures or withdraw entirely." Elena nodded slowly even though there was no one to see it. "Okay," she said. "Are you all right?" Owens asked. The same question she'd asked that morning. Elena looked at the inhaler on the counter. "I will be," she said. "Can I ask you one more thing?" "Go ahead." "The email," Elena said. "They mentioned my son, his condition specifically. How did they get that?" Then there was a brief pause. "Careful. We're looking into that," Owens said. "But Ms. Ramirez, the fact that they went there tells you something about where they are. People who are confident don't threaten children. People who are desperate do." Elena sat with that for a moment. "Thank you," she said, and hung up. She picked up the inhaler from the counter and held it in both hands, shook it once. That hollow rattle. Friday. She had until Friday. She opened her laptop and sent an invoice reminder to the accounting firm. $32 outstanding from 2 weeks ago. Then she opened a browser and searched for patient assistance programs for asthma medication, something she had been too proud to do for 6 months. There were 4 she hadn't looked at. She filled out the first application in 11 minutes because she had learned to be fast at paperwork. Then she made a cup of coffee, sat back down at the table, and waited for Friday. The warrant was executed on a Thursday. Elena found out the same way the rest of Austin did. A brief notice on the local business newsfeed, 4 lines, stating that federal investigators had entered the Vanguard Health offices as part of an ongoing review of clinical trial submissions. No names, no details, just the clean bureaucratic language of a process that had moved from invisible to undeniable. Her phone rang 20 minutes later. "Hale, it's moving," he said. "Chen has been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. The board is convening an emergency session tomorrow morning." "And?" Elena said. "They want you there," he said. She almost laughed. Not from amusement, from the particular exhaustion of a situation that kept asking more from her every time she thought she'd given everything it required. "I'm not on the board," she said. "No," Hale said. "But you're the one who submitted the original data. They need to understand the full sequence of events from someone who isn't me and isn't Chen and isn't already compromised by being inside this company." He paused. "Elena, it's almost over. But they need to hear it from you." She looked at Diego's inhaler on the counter, refilled now. She had gotten the patient assistance approval 2 days ago, a small bureaucratic miracle that had made her sit at the kitchen table for a full minute doing nothing. "What time?" she said. 8:30, he said. "I'll send a car. I'll take the bus," she said. The Vanguard Health boardroom was on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the Austin skyline behind it like a backdrop someone had chosen deliberately. A long table with 8 people around it. all of them in the kind of clothes that signaled they had never once calculated whether they could afford to be there. Elena walked in with her notebook and sat in the chair they pointed her to and looked at the 8 faces looking back at her. She recognized Chen immediately, not from the LinkedIn profile, from the lobby. He was one of the 2 men in suits she had seen speaking low and close together the morning of her interview. She hadn't known his name then. She knew his face. He was looking at her with the composed expression of a man who had spent decades in rooms like this one and knew how to perform calmly, regardless of what was happening underneath it. Elena looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had sat on the edge of her son's bed at 2 a.m. and made her decision there, in the dark, with no audience and nothing to perform for. The board chair. A woman in her 60s named Patricia Voss, who had said nothing yet, but had the energy of someone who said very little and meant all of it, looked at Elena and said, "Ms. Ramirez, please tell us in your own words what happened." From the beginning, so Elena told them, she told it the same way she'd told Owens, clearly chronologically, without editorializing. The lobby, the overheard conversation, the notebook, the car, the contractor badge, the file, the FDA portal, the email that mentioned her son by condition if not by name. She set her notebook on the table and opened it to the page she'd written on the sidewalk outside this building 11 days ago. Slide it to the center of the table. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Chen leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Ramirez," he said, his voice measured and collegial, the voice of a man who had navigated difficult rooms for 30 years. "What you overheard was an internal conversation about presentation strategy. The figures in question represent a legitimate methodological interpretation of the trial data, not a falsification. The FDA review will confirm." "The FDA review is already underway," Elena said. "And the original unaltered trial report is in their possession. So that argument is between you and them now, not between you and me." Chen looked at her. She looked back. Hale, sitting 2 seats down, said nothing. He didn't need to. Patricia Voss looked at Chen for a long moment. Then she looked at the other board members with the brief, efficient eye contact of someone taking a silent vote. Then she looked back at the table and said, "Raymond, would you excuse Dr. Chen and arrange for his access credentials to be suspended pending the outcome of the federal review?" It wasn't a question. Chen stood slowly, straightened his jacket, looked around the table once, not at Elena, past her, at the window and the skyline behind it, and then walked out without another word. The door closed. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Voss looked at Elena and said, "Thank you, Miss Ramirez. I mean that specifically and not generally." Elena nodded, picked up her notebook, closed it. 6 weeks later, the FDA rejected Vanguard's original approval submission and opened a formal fraud investigation into the altered trial data. Chen was indicted on 2 federal counts. 3 board members who had known and said nothing resigned before they were asked to leave. Vanguard Health, under Hale's restored leadership, resubmitted the respiratory monitoring app with the accurate trial figures that still cleared the approval threshold, slower but legitimately, because the technology itself had always been sound. It was the numbers around it that had been broken. The app launched 4 months later. Elena read about it on her phone on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee, boys already at school. A small article, local Austin Tech News. No mention of her name, which was exactly how she wanted it. Hale called her that afternoon, offered her a position. Ethics and compliance, mid-level, benefits included, salary that would clear her medical debt inside a year. She asked for 2 days to think about it. She took one. She accepted on a Wednesday morning, called the babysitter to cover the afternoon, and took the bus downtown to sign the paperwork in an office building she had walked out of, defeated 7 weeks earlier. On the way home, she stopped at the pharmacy, paid for Diego's inhaler refill out of her own pocket for the first time in 2 months, put it in her bag and walked out into the Austin afternoon, the city loud and indifferent and expensive, around her, the same city it had always been. She took the bus home, made dinner, pasta, jarred sauce, frozen peas. Marcus complained about the peas the way he always did. Diego ate quietly and then looked up at her with that careful attention he'd had since he was small. "You seem different," he said. Elena looked at her son across the kitchen table. Good different or bad different, she said. Diego considered this with the seriousness he applied to everything. Just different, he said, like something finished. Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she got up and cleared the plates and ran the water and stood at the sink looking out the window at the street below. Ordinary Tuesday, alive. Something finished, something started. The gap between them smaller than it had ever been. She turned off the tap. Homework, she said. Both of you, now. Marcus groaned. Diego was already reaching for his backpack. Elena dried her hands and sat back down at the table and thought about none of it and all of it at once, the way you do when something that cost you everything turns out to have been exactly worth it. Outside, Austin kept moving. It always did.